There is a convenience store chain so beloved that people tattoo its logo on their bodies.
They hold wedding ceremonies inside its locations and defend its honor in newspapers. Its signature hoagie is even the official sandwich of Philadelphia. A famous Hollywood actress who visited one called the experience something she had always assumed was just a myth. One governor of Florida actually offered to name a town after it just to accelerate the company's expansion there. The legendary show Saturday Night Live has even featured it in sketches not just once, but two separate times. When the Pope came to America, the mayor of Philadelphia officially announced that His Holiness would be served one of its famous sandwiches. This company is Wawa, generating an estimated $18.64 billion in annual revenue across more than 1,100 stores in 14 states and Washington, D.C. The family that built this empire has owned the enterprise for 5 generations, spanning 223 years. And yet almost no one outside the Mid-Atlantic has ever heard their name. On today's fascinating episode of Old Money Luxury, we are tracing how a New Jersey ironworks dynasty very quietly built one of the most fanatically loved brands in the whole of American history. Now, Wawa is, at least on paper, a convenience store chain. It is known for selling coffee, hoagies, gas, and groceries at over 1,100 locations across the eastern United States, and it's now opening stores in states that never even heard of it 5 years ago. But that description is about as accurate and useful as describing the Vatican as just some real estate operation in Rome. We're talking estimated annual revenues of $18.64 billion. This was confirmed by Forbes in their most recent ranking of America's largest private companies, where Wawa now sits at number 21. It's a company that first began as a New Jersey iron foundry back in 1803, pivoted to dairy, and then to convenience retail in 1964. And through it all, it has never once issued a single share of public stock. Roughly 200 descendants of founder George Wood own the majority of it through 5 generations of complicated trusts and legal structures. Meanwhile, more than 40% of the company is held by its employees through one of the largest stock ownership plans in the entire country. You won't find any franchises. Every single store is company-owned, and every location runs 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Your average Wawa customer will spend $7.42 per visit against a national average of $4.12. That's roughly 80% more than the competition. And the cult behavior that creates those numbers is not some marketing department stunt. Consider Jeremy Plauché, a rescue squad worker from Millville, New Jersey. He had the Wawa logo permanently tattooed on his inner bicep because all his friends in Louisiana refused to believe his incredible descriptions of the place. Johnny Knoxville, the infamous creator of Jackass, has one of those tattoos too. His was applied during a Westchester, Pennsylvania filming session that was apparently fueled by whiskey and a great deal of adrenaline. Scott Gaddis and Cindy Richardson were married at a Wawa in Abingdon, Maryland in 2008 and then held their reception there. Kate Winslet, filming Mayor of Easttown in Delaware County, later described Wawa as something she had previously assumed was entirely mythical. And Mitt Romney, on the 2012 campaign trail while he was in Pennsylvania, discovered Wawa's touchscreen ordering system and immediately went viral for his astonishment at a technology that had been in every single store since 2002. Even the great Tina Fey has mentioned the Wawa parking lot on Saturday Night Live. That's right. The parking lot, not just the store, because for Philadelphians, that parking lot is also a legitimate cultural venue. None of this happened accidentally, and none of this was ever designed by a high-priced marketing team. It all emerged from a company that produced this fanatical loyalty as a natural byproduct of doing things correctly for 60 years. If you enjoyed this kind of deep dive into institutional history, our free Substack newsletter is where we really examine how old money dynasties build and then maintain their wealth across many generations. You'll find the link for that in the description just below. The Wood family story actually begins not in Pennsylvania, and certainly not inside a convenience store. It starts inside the iron furnaces of southern New Jersey more than 2 full centuries ago. Back in 1803, a member of the Wood family lit the very first furnace of an iron foundry in Millville, New Jersey. And so, the enterprise that would eventually grow into an $18 billion convenience store empire was finally underway. The foundry would later be formally incorporated in 1865 as the Millville Manufacturing Company, running on iron production and eventually expanding into textiles. These were the cotton goods that built huge fortunes across the mid-Atlantic. David C. Wood, who was George Wood's uncle according to family records, operated those very same New Jersey iron foundries and then used that accumulated capital to fund whatever came next. And what came next was dairy. In 1890, George Wood, a born entrepreneur and the grandson of the original foundry operators, relocated from New Jersey to Delaware County, Pennsylvania. He did so by purchasing 1,000 acres of valuable land in the Chester Heights area. He brought in Guernsey cows from the British Crown dependency island of Guernsey, a breed chosen specifically for the exceptionally high fat content of its milk. The land he ultimately bought sat within a township that had since, around 1884, been known by a very unusual and distinct name, Wawa. The name itself came from an Ojibwe word, wee-wee, which is pronounced roughly way-way. It meant snow goose, though the company itself has for a long time translated it as wild goose. And the Ojibwe were not even the people native to the Delaware Valley. The Lenni Lenape were the people who inhabited that region, and they used a completely different vocabulary. The word made its way into local language through a landowner by the name of Edward Worth, who named his entire estate Wawa, after the Canada geese that would gather at the still water behind the nearby Lenni Mill Dam. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow had even used the word in his 1855 poem, The Song of Hiawatha. He it was who sent the wild goose Wawa northward, truly cementing the name's cultural reach. The town then formally adopted the name in 1884. And so, when George Wood purchased his 1,000 acres, he was buying a piece of land in a place that was already called Wawa. Then in 1902, Wood established a small milk processing plant on the property. Pasteurization was still quite uncommon at the time, and raw milk posed a genuine health hazard. Children all across Pennsylvania were regularly getting sick from contaminated dairy. George Wood's response to this crisis truly demonstrated the family's particular kind of genius. He arranged for doctors to certify that his milk was sanitary and perfectly safe, and then he trademarked the iconic slogan, "Vie Health by the Bottle." The certified milk strategy worked like a charm. Demand for Wawa dairy products grew explosively through the 1920s, and the company delivered directly to homes all across Pennsylvania and New Jersey. The goose logo, which was a Canada goose, not technically the snow goose that inspired the name, appeared on their dairy packaging from the early 1900s onward. By the time George Wood's grandson was born, the family now controlled one of the most trusted dairy brands in the entire Philadelphia region, delivered by dedicated milkmen to doorsteps from their Delaware County headquarters. And the Wood name was synonymous with something incredibly specific: milk you could absolutely trust. What ultimately dismantled the Wood family's massive dairy fortune wasn't a competitor or a market crash, but a common household appliance. Because by the 1940s, the refrigerator had become a standard American household fixture, and the entire logic of home milk delivery was beginning to completely collapse beneath it. Before refrigeration became truly widespread, a family's milk supply absolutely needed to arrive fresh each and every morning. The milkman was a nutritional necessity, not some kind of service luxury. The refrigerator completely changed that entire calculation. By the time the early 1960s rolled around, the shift was complete. Consumers were now driving to supermarkets and buying their milk off shelves, meaning the milkmen were becoming redundant. The dairy that George Wood had built up over 60 years. The special certified milk of the Guernsey cows. The Buy Health by the Bottle tagline, that whole home delivery network across 2 states, was being quietly made obsolete by a simple box that kept your food cold. Graham Wood. George's own grandson saw what was happening. He moved decisively with the managers, instinct shaped by a family company that had never ever survived by being passive. Family historian and architectural historian Maria Thompson A relative of Graham's described him quite simply, saying, "He was a man who could roll up his sleeves." His management style had been heavily shaped by military service in both World War II and the Korean conflict, an experience that instilled in him what Thompson called a sense of shared responsibility, not just individual accountability, a value that would eventually define the company's culture. Graham Wood completely bypassed consultants and commissioned studies. He traveled out to Ohio, visited a friend who ran convenience stores, and he studied their entire model directly. He came back with a plan for 3 small stores that would sell Wawa's dairy products, but would also stay open earlier and later than the supermarkets, serving customers who needed perishables without making a full grocery run. That very first store officially opened on April 16, 1964, at 1212 McDade Boulevard in Folsom, Pennsylvania. They even held a parade for the opening, but the immediate response from customers made it look quite modest. One early employee remembered, "It was completely mobbed in the morning with people going to work and again in the evening coming home from work. Everybody was always in the Wawa. They were just making money hand over fist in those first years." By the end of the 1960s, just 5 years after that first store opened, Wawa had already exploded to nearly 80 locations. What began as a 3-store experiment had blossomed into a chain, and that chain had officially become a serious company. The original store at 1212 McDade Boulevard ran for 52 years before it closed on June 17, 2016, replaced by a massive new Super Wawa just down the street. And the way the community mourned its closing told you everything you needed to know about what Wawa had become. Graham Wood remained at the helm of the company until 1977. That's when he appointed a young, ambitious lawyer named Richard Wood Jr. as his successor. This was a single choice that would ultimately define the company's entire direction for the next 30 years. From that one small store in Folsom, Wawa began to grow at a blistering pace that consistently outran its own ambitious expectations. New Jersey finally entered the picture in 1967 when the first location opened in Vineland, just 3 years after the original Folsom store. A mere 8 years after that first store, Wawa celebrated its 100th location and converted the majority of its stores to 24-hour operation. The year was 1972, and the incredible expansion showed absolutely no signs of slowing down or plateauing. While the growth was relentless, the more important story was about what these stores were becoming. Not just dairy outlets, but a complete and fully formed food culture. Store managers started organically selling freshly brewed coffee and delicious hoagies back in 1975. This wasn't because corporate told them to, but simply because it was exactly what their customers were demanding. The hoagie was a Philadelphia institution long before Wawa even existed, and Wawa's own version would become the chain's most defining product. Wawa officially launched the hugely popular Shorty Hoagie in 1992. They also held the very first Hoagie Day at Philadelphia City Hall, where the hoagie was officially named the official sandwich of Philadelphia. Hoagie Fest came along in 2008, an annual summer promotion with a cool 1960s Peace Festival vibe and discounted sandwiches. It was all about the pricing. It's been running every single summer since then and celebrated its 15th anniversary in 2023. The hoagie's cultural impact became so ingrained that when Wawa and the TV show The Goldbergs ran a joint promotion in 2021, the main event was a Goldberg's garlic chicken cheesy palm hoagie sold across all 940-plus stores. Then new technology arrived in 2002. That's when Wawa installed self-serve touchscreen, ordering kiosks in every location, becoming one of the first retailers in the country to do it more than a decade before McDonald's rolled out similar systems. But gasoline actually arrived even earlier than that. The very first Wawa fuel station opened in Millsboro, Delaware in 1996, and within a decade, the company opened its 200th fuel store. Today, more than 900 of Wawa's 1,100-plus locations are also offering gasoline to customers. The financial result of all this innovation was a per-store productivity level that its competitors simply could not hope to replicate. At a time when the national average for a convenience store visit generates $4.12, the average Wawa visit brings in $7.42. It's no surprise that customers will literally drive past other stores just to get to a Wawa. In the 15-county Delaware Valley area, Wawa actually ranks third in overall grocery sales, behind only ShopRite and Acme, a feat no other convenience store has ever achieved in any American market. Wawa proudly opened its 1,000th store in Oakland. That was in New Jersey in 2023, and they donated $1 million in gift cards to charities on opening day. The question of whether it would ever open a 2,000th store or be sold to investors who would force rapid expansion, no matter the cost, would come down to a single pivotal meeting in July of 2003. Richard Dick Wood Jr. first arrived at Wawa in 1970 as a young lawyer with a deep background in mergers and acquisitions. He was brought in by Graham Wood to be general counsel and was then appointed as Graham's chosen successor in 1977. He officially took the top job in 1981, inheriting a thriving company with 240 locations across 5 different states. He would go on to lead it for the next 24 years, but the first challenge he faced had nothing to do with growth. The immediate and pressing problem was simple survival. As in the late 1980s, Wawa faced a brutal and punishing price war. The company's expansion completely stalled, and it went through a period that company veterans would later grimly describe as the dark days. Dick Wood's brilliant response was to stop competing on price and instead invest heavily in quality and company culture. This was a philosophy that would eventually create the cult-like loyalty that defines the Wawa brand today. But the more dramatic test came from inside the ownership structure itself. The Wood family had created a series of complex trusts way back in the 1920s, which were overseen by Fidelity Bank. The bank grew more and more concerned as Wawa's value skyrocketed and the trusts held an increasingly large position in a single illiquid private company, Asset. In 1996, lawyers for the trust formally recommended either selling Wawa or doing an IPO and told management to make a list of 10 potential buyers. At the same time, a large block of Wawa shares had moved over to the McNeil family, who were the heirs to the massive Tylenol fortune. And after watching Wawa's explosive growth, they decided it was finally time to cash out. By July 2003, 2 Wall Street investment banks were at Wawa's headquarters, officially beginning the extensive planning for an IPO. But Dick Wood killed the deal on the spot. He later described facing the bankers, saying, "I felt like a skunk at a picnic." And his reasoning was strictly financial. U.S. stock markets had just tanked, cutting the potential IPO valuation by nearly 1/3. And he was absolutely convinced that a public Wawa would be pressured into short-term decisions that would completely destroy the culture that fueled its success. "I don't think we could have driven the company to the size it is with the special culture it has without being a private company," he explained. To fund the buyout of one particular stake, negotiations finally landed on a price of $141 million. So Dick Wood turned to his own employees. He dramatically expanded the employee stock ownership plan in December 2003 and convinced all the associates to convert parts of their 401k savings in profit sharing directly into ESOP shares. When asked to bet on Wawa's future, the employees jumped at the chance with 70% opting in and raising $59 million from within the company. By 2004, the McNeil family was finally bought out. Private ownership was now secure, and the company that was just one presentation away from a Wall Street ticker symbol was now more privately held than ever before. The tool Dick Wood used for the buyout had been quietly operating since 1977, when Graham Wood first started sharing company profits with his associates. It was a gesture that would blossom into one of the most significant employee ownership experiments in the history of American retail. The official employee stock ownership plan was created in 1992, and at first, it held about 8% of the company's stock. But it was the growth between 1992 and 2004, especially the 2003 restructuring, that turned it into something much bigger. It became a system where regular store workers could build up life-changing wealth just by staying. The financial results of what that ESOP created are absolutely extraordinary. Shares valued at $900 each when the plan was massively expanded. In 2003, were worth $14,000 by 2020. That is a 1,455% increase across 17 years. An employee who put $10,000 of their own savings into the ESOP shares in 2003 was holding around $161,000 in stock just 17 years later. Inconos magazine even reported many Wawa employees retired as millionaires. Take Cheryl Farley, who started at Wawa part-time back in 1982. She moved over to information technology, and then she retired at 58 years old. She later said because of the ESOP, many retirees are doing things people would never dream of. By 2012, the plan had over 9,500 members, owning 39% of the company. By 2025, the ESOP accounted for over 40% of Wawa stock, with the total value of the plan exceeding $2 billion by the end of 2018. But this story takes a darker turn. In 2015, Wawa suddenly changed the rules. Instead of being allowed to hold shares until the retirement age of 68, employees who left were now forced to sell their ESOP shares right away at the current price of around $6,900 to $7,600 a share. Just 5 years later, those exact same shares were worth $14,000. Lawsuits later claimed that this forced sale rule, when combined with Wawa's switch from a C corporation to an S corporation, allowed the Wood family to boost its ownership from about 47% to a controlling majority just before a family trust was set to expire, which might have otherwise forced a sale. The very first lawsuit, Pfeiffer versus Wawa, settled in 2018 for $25 million, covering up to 3,000 former employees. The second, Cunningham versus Wawa, settled in 2020 for $21.6 million. In both settlements, Wawa admitted to no wrongdoing. Brad Wall, who spent 2 decades modernizing their dairy and then spearheading rapid store expansion as construction director, described his feelings afterward. Wawa, he said, is pretty much dead to me now. The move to expand into Florida in 2012 was, by any normal retail logic, completely bizarre. Wawa's entire competitive strength had always come from its dense, clustered networks of stores, the exact kind of supply chain efficiency you get from having 600 stores just a few hundred miles from a central warehouse. Leaping entirely over Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia just to plant a flag in Central Florida went against every single rule of gradual, sensible expansion. But the strategy behind the move was much smarter than it looked. Florida offered cheap real estate compared to the crowded Northeast, a thriving convenience store culture, and crucially, hundreds of thousands of transplants and snowbirds from the Philadelphia metro area who had lived without Wawa for years and were basically a guaranteed customer base before the first store opened. On July 18, 2012, Wawa cut the ribbon on its first Florida store in Orlando, located right across the street from SeaWorld. The CEO at the time, Howard Stuckel, led the ribbon-cutting ceremony attended by Florida Governor Rick Scott and Orlando Mayor Bodie Dyer. Within just 5 weeks, Wawa had opened 5 Orlando locations. Governor Scott soon became what you might call Wawa's biggest government cheerleader. In February of 2015, while on a job recruitment trip to Pennsylvania, he announced even more Florida expansion and reportedly offered to name a Florida town after Wawa just to entice the company to accelerate its commitment to the state. He would even show up to store openings in person. By the end of 2015, Wawa already had more than 70 locations throughout Florida. By 2019, the company celebrated opening its 200th Florida store. By the mid-2020s, Florida actually had more Wawa locations than any other state, including Pennsylvania, where the company had operated for a full 60 years. The company has announced its plans for 400 Florida stores by 2028. The Florida success story proved something incredibly important about Wawa's expansion strategy. The brand's intense following actually travels with its fans, which means every person who moves from Philadelphia to Atlanta or Charlotte is a free marketing asset that Wawa never has to pay for. Florida created the blueprint. The major Southeast expansion that came next With Alabama's first Wawa opening in April 2024, North Carolina's in May, and Georgia's in November was planted with the exact same logic. You go where your existing customers already are, and then you let the word of mouth from those fans do your opening day promotion. The result was massive lines wrapping around the block at the new store openings in Georgia and Alabama. And a company that had exploded from 600 stores in 2012 to more than 1,100 stores operating across 14 states and Washington, D.C. by the end of 2025. The goal as announced by CEO Chris Geisens is 1,800 stores by 2030. The word cult gets applied to brands a little too freely, describing everything from Apple fanatics to people who just like one fast food chain a little more. In Wawa's case, the word is earned in ways that are extremely well documented. For example, Jeremy Plosh, a rescue squad worker from Millville, New Jersey, had to explain Wawa to friends down in Louisiana who completely refused to believe a place like he described could even exist. His solution was to get the Wawa logo tattooed directly on his right inner bicep. When Wawa heard about this, the company sent him in his words, "Coupons out the wazoo." And Johnny Knoxville's Wawa tattoo was actually applied during a Jackass filming session there in Westchester, Pennsylvania, roughly 24 years before the tattoo artist finally shared it publicly on Instagram in October of 2024. Scott Gaddis and Cindy Richardson were married at a Wawa in Abington, Maryland back in 2008, holding both their wedding ceremony and the reception right there in the store. In 2009-5, young women from West Chester, Pennsylvania finally completed a quest that took almost 2 years, visiting every single Wawa location then in existence, all 586 stores. And Kate Winslet, when she was preparing for mayor of Easttown, told the Envelope podcast in May 2021, "It almost felt like a mythical place, Wawa. By the time I got there, I was like, it's real." Mitt Romney discovered Wawa's touchscreen ordering system during a 2012 Pennsylvania campaign stop and expressed such obvious amazement that MSNBC presented the moment as evidence of how detached he was from everyday American life. His real point was that the touchscreen was free market innovation the government could learn from. But the Wawa moment is what became the headline. Tina Fey. Born in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania, she's the closest thing the brand has to a celebrity patron saint. In a December 2015 SNL sketch, she played Cousin Karen from Philly, even referencing a man attacking a Salvation Army Santa, with a car battery right in the Wawa parking lot. The focus was on the parking lot as a cultural stage, not just a store. Then in a February 2018 SNL sketch set during the American Revolution, she offered up venison hoagies and corn fritters from Wawa, cementing the brand as a Philly institution that goes way back to the founding fathers. Then there's The Goldbergs, the popular ABC sitcom set in Jenkintown, Pennsylvania, which ran for 10 seasons from 2013 to 2023, and it made Wawa a constant landmark in its stories. The parking lot, the inside of the store, the hoagie, counter all of it. Eventually, the show and the store formalized their relationship with a co-branded promotional week in April 2021, which even featured a Goldberg's garlic chicken cheesy parm hoagie. The wild part is none of this was engineered by some marketing team. The family behind Wawa has never explained how they did it. But the bill for 6 decades of this beloved reputation arrived on December 10th, 2019. When Wawa's cybersecurity team discovered malware operating on the company's payment processing servers. It turned out the malware had been there since March 4th, 2019. For 9 undetected months, it was harvesting credit and debit card data from every swipe at around 850 Wawa locations across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, Florida, and Washington. DC Wawa managed to contain the huge breach within 48 hours. And went public to its customers on December 19th. Then on January 27th, 2020, a dark web fraud marketplace known as Joker's Stash posted about 30 million stolen payment card accounts for sales, listing them as Big Bada Boom 3. Cybersecurity journalist Brian Krebs quickly confirmed the stolen cards were linked directly to Wawa purchases. the final estimated total of compromised accounts hit about 34 million cards complete with card numbers, expiration dates, and cardholder names. Thankfully, PIN numbers and chip-based purchases were not affected. The legal settlements that followed added up to roughly $48.5 million. $9 million of that went to consumers. $28.5 million to the financial institutions that had to reissue cards, and $8 million in a multi-state settlement with 7 state attorneys general. Wawa was also ordered to perform a complete cybersecurity overhaul, including network segmentation, implementing multi-factor authentication, and doing annual penetration testing, plus achieving PCI DSS compliance, all at a remediation cost estimated to be $35 million. A federal judge that same year also approved a $1.4 million class action settlement where over 300 assistant GMs alleged Wawa misclassified them as exempt employees, paying them for 40 hours a week while demanding 50 to 60. Then in October of 2022, Wawa suddenly closed 2 of its Center City, Philadelphia stores, one at 12th and Market and another at 19th and Market siting. Ongoing safety and major security challenges. Rumors began to fly that Wawa was thinking about halting all future expansion in Philadelphia. One incident right before. The closures involved a mob of about 100 people who ransacked a Wawa in Mayfair, causing an estimated $10,000 in damages. And then you have Sheetz, founded by Bob Sheetz in Altoona, Pennsylvania in 1952, 12 years before Wawa even opened its first store. Sheetz is the only other Pennsylvania-based convenience chain with a similar culture and scale operating 770 stores as of 2025. For decades, the two chains had coexisted peacefully by sticking to different geographic territories, with Sheetz in Western, and Central Pennsylvania and Wawa dominating the East. Based on a supposed gentleman's agreement between them that Wawa's president Brian Schaller completely denied in 2024. He insisted no such agreement has ever existed. In early 2026, Sheetz opened a brand new location in Limerick Township in Montgomery County, deep in the Philadelphia suburbs, right in Wawa's own backyard, and it drew 50-person lines on its opening day. George Wood certified that milk was safe for children back in 1902 and built up a home delivery route. What his heirs have built generates more revenue than the GDP of 60 different nations, and still hardly anyone outside the mid-Atlantic even knows the family's name. A man named Gassons joined Wawa in accounting and finance back in 1997. He became Chief Financial and Administrative Officer in 2007 and was named President and CEO in 2013, only the second non-family CEO in its history. In his biography on the WSFS Financial Corporation Board of Directors page, he describes Wawa as a privately held $20 billion organization. The Forbes 2025 ranking of America's leading private companies estimates their revenue at a staggering $18.64 billion. This places Wawa at 21st nationally and number 1 in the state of Pennsylvania. The Wood family, which consists of nearly 200 descendants of founder George Wood, now own less than half of the company through complex trust structures first set up in the 1920s, designed the Wawa way to keep the enterprise private for another 150 years. More than 40% of the company is held by employees through the ESOP program. The corporation's estimated enterprise value is currently sitting somewhere between $16 and $21 billion. Both Richard D. Wood Jr. and the current George Wood now hold the unique title of Chairman Emeritus. The former is the 5th-generation CEO who personally killed the 2003 IPO. The latter is the latest link in a chain stretching all the way back to the Delaware County dairy patriarch. The immensely private family has never once called a press conference to discuss any of this. They have given almost 0 interviews, and no Wood family member has ever appeared on a magazine cover. For 223 years across iron textiles, dairy coffee hoagies, gas digital kiosks, and data breach settlements, ESOP lawsuits, and ribbon cuttings attended by governors. The powerful Wood family has painstakingly built and defended an enterprise their ancestor originally started by. smelting iron in a New Jersey furnace, all without anyone outside of the mid Atlantic ever learning their incredibly secretive family name. Their 1800 store goal by 2030 would officially make Wawa one of the 10 largest convenience chains in the entire United States. Based on location count and every new state it expands into, delivers yet another wave of passionate converts who will fiercely defend the brand in parking lots across social media, and sometimes even tattooed on their skin. 47,000 associates are currently working at Wawa locations all across the country. Over 40% of them actually hold shares in the very company they serve every single day, while the Wood family who started it all by certifying milk safe for children, back in 1902, still holds the majority of an incredible enterprise, which is now worth an estimated $16 to $21 billion. This American family that built a brand people truly worship while remaining completely and deliberately invisible for over 2 centuries has no apparent plans to ever introduce themselves to the public. As always, we definitely want to hear from you. Head to the comments below and tell us what would it actually take for you to get a permanent tattoo of a convenience store's logo. And is there any other brand in your world that even comes close to inspiring that level of intense devotion? We truly appreciate you spending your time with us here on Old Money Luxury. We can't wait to see you in the next episode.